A modern AI data center can make one rack behave like a very large accelerator. It begins with a small question on a dim device beside your bed. The room stays warm around you while the question travels outward to be answered. This is the Night Almanac, your home in the dark, with nothing to do and nowhere to be. Tonight you drift far out, past the room, past the city, to where the world goes quiet, and home by morning. Sleep whenever you like. Cloth rests against your arm, and the device near the bed gives no readable time. Somewhere beyond the wall, the question is already leaving the familiar surface of the night. It passes into a cooler place where a rack becomes more than a cabinet. It becomes a joined machine. The first unit ahead is the rack scale system NVIDIA designed. Its Grace processors and Blackwell chips are joined inside one vertical frame. Liquid cooling belongs to that design, so the machine can gather heat at the chip instead of leaving the work to open air. In the aisle, the metal face sits still, with thin seams of pale status light. Your question has crossed the edge of the room. It is no longer a phrase in your hand. It is a pattern moving through cable and glass, going toward the cold metal ahead. The body at rest can remain heavy and warm. Farther out, the machine takes in your question as plain data and quietly begins turning it into an answer. A rack-scale AI system is physical before it is clever. It has rails and cooling paths. Its modules arrive as boards held among connectors. The processors are bodies on rails, not a cloud above the ceiling. The hall gives the idea, a graphite rectangle in a row of other rectangles. The bed stays behind you like a room with its door left ajar. Inside that first column, Grace CPUs sit in the same described system as Blackwell GPUs. The exact count has already done its work: 36 CPUs and 72 GPUs. What matters now is the closeness. The chips are arranged so the whole can behave less like separate boxes and more like one accelerator body, cooled through narrow metal paths. Its height makes the claim visible. A single rack is a tall room for components, not a loose stack of computers. Trays repeat upward. Metal guides hold their line. Hoses and cables take different routes through the same tall body. The question slips into that vertical order, where separate pieces begin to share one task. The question moves deeper than the visible front panel. It passes into a place that has its own inner geography. Boards sit at different heights. Links vanish behind metal before returning elsewhere. A person half awake would not need the map. The machine has it already, held in traces and repeatable fit. NVIDIA calls that web the NV-Link switch system. Its woven fabric moves 130 terabytes among the chips every second, more than 5 years of nonstop streaming, carried a single heartbeat. They think as one, the way a quiet mind holds a clear thought. Behind the silent face, the link paths trace a soft silver grid. That bandwidth is a wide passage for the chips housed together. It is more than the bedside has to hold. It is the width of an inner road where pieces of a model can move between processors without leaving the metal. In that nearness, the joined assembly begins to feel less divided. The warmer room has faded into the distance now. You are following the question by its effects, not by effort. It enters a place where every path has a socket, a bend, and a destination. The stillness is helpful. Nothing in the hall needs to hurry for the work to continue inside the coupled metal. The switch fabric inside is not the same as the wider network outside it. NVLink holds the close conversation among the GPUs. A second layer waits beyond it, built for scale out. That difference makes the system legible. First, the enclosure gathers itself. Then the cluster begins to spread across rows. Inside the apparatus, distance has been made into design. A chip is near another chip because the path between them is engineered to be short in use. The physical gap remains metal and air. The working gap is narrowed by the link fabric. Your attention can pass across that difference without trying to measure it. The rack has a front and a back. Its face shows order, while the real joining sits behind panels. Cables leave in controlled bundles. Cooling tubes hold to their fittings. The machine has weight and depth. It carries a route for work through its tall body. You move past the first system, letting the work stay sealed behind its panels. NVIDIA Quantum 2 InfiniBand switches give AI clusters their high-speed scale out networking. One build of the switch carries 64 ports at 400 gigabits per second. A larger form trades some speed for more connections. It uses 128 links at 200 gigabits per second each. That is the wider fabric beyond it. In each row, many black cables gather toward one switch face. A scale-out switch lets one rack join the row without pretending the row is one board. The work can move outward from there into neighboring machines. The names stay technical, but the shape is easy to hold. One close layer binds the chips inside. A wider network lets it speak across the hall. The switch face is a boundary between the inside and the larger room. On one side, accelerator trays keep their close exchange. On the other, cables lead outward into the row. The building does not become abstract at that boundary. It becomes more visibly physical, because every wider path still starts as a plug seated in a port. The question that began near your pillow has become packets and waiting silicon. You are still only following, carried farther from the domestic glow. The hall does not ask for attention. It offers a sequence of objects. Each one receives the work and passes it along through cable and port. A Quantum 2 switch delivers 51.2 terabits per second of bidirectional throughput by NVIDIA's figures. The same device moves more than 66.5 billion packets in that same span. This module is a crossing point for the cluster, not a decorative panel. Behind its ports, the traffic keeps many conversations in motion under a thin, frost-colored line of light. Bidirectional throughput means the paths carry traffic both ways through the switch. The phrase sounds dry, yet the object is simple. Signals enter and leave along many fibers or copper links, meeting in a piece of hardware made for traffic. In the data hall, this scale of movement can sit inside one dark shelf. Packets per second are counted far beyond ordinary sense here. The number belongs to the switch, where the cluster's tiny messages can be sorted and sent onward. They pass below attention. The device near the bed only began the question. The data hall carries the fast part in hardware you will never touch. A cluster needs more than fast chips. It has to keep the processors fed with data and intermediate results. The network layer helps the work spread, while storage waits at another depth. This room is built from these layers together: compute in the rack, network between racks, storage behind them, and power entering through measured hardware. The aisle corrects an easy assumption. There is no single cloud shape to enter. There are shelves and bolts, modules and bus bars, fiber bends, and cooling plates. Each piece is exact enough to be replaceable, yet the whole assembly is meant to act as one large instrument. The question passes through that order and becomes work. You are far enough out now that home is only a glow behind the thought. Meta's 2022 AI Research Supercluster gives a useful, older scale mark. It was designed to grow from 6,080 GPUs to 16,000 GPUs. Its InfiniBand fabric was described as non-oversubscribed, and the system was planned for nearly 5 exaflops of mixed precision compute. In the mind, that scale becomes rows beyond the first rack. The phrase non-oversubscribed means the fabric was designed without a built-in bottleneck at that layer. The older cluster matters here because it shows how fast one rack becomes a larger machine. First comes the cabinet, then the row, then the networked room, built so many accelerators can be addressed as parts of one planned system. Nearly 5 exaflops is a historical measure of mixed precision compute in that metasystem. The number can pass like a marker on the wall. It does not need to become a race. It simply says the room was designed for arithmetic at vast scale. Racks and fabric hold the work instead of one glowing box. The work continues away from the first array into a room that remembers many designs. Some are current. Older markers make the scale visible. You move through them without ranking them. Each one is built for coherence, where chips and links hold together long enough to learn. Meta's 2022 storage layer was itself a major system. It included 175 petabytes of pure storage flash array, 46 petabytes of cache storage, and 10 petabytes of flash blade. The compute room needed that depth behind it. A training cluster does not only calculate, it reads and stages stored data through shelves that look quieter than the accelerators. Petabytes are large measures, yet the visual remains modest. A shelf can look almost asleep while it holds the backing store for a research cluster. The flash array name gives the layer a real object, not just a vague pool. Cache storage gives the work a nearer place to pause. Flash blade adds another named piece of that storage body. Storage changes the feeling of the hall. The accelerator rack is tense, with short internal paths. The storage bay is deeper and flatter. It waits as a library of bits, but without shelves of books or readable labels. The work reaches into it through the same engineered comm that moved packets through the switch. The cluster's memory of data differs from a person's memory. It is arranged in hardware, counted in petabytes, and reached through the fabric. Your own half-awake thought can remain loose. Farther out, the machine keeps its layers distinct. Compute runs in one layer. Storage waits in another. The path between them has already been planned. A data center built for AI is therefore not one kind of object. It is a stack of cooperating physical layers. The accelerator rack gathers chips closely. The InfiniBand switch links machines across the room. The storage layer keeps the training material near enough to feed the work. This is the cloud made tangible, one unit and one cable path at a time. The row falls away behind you, yet the path keeps leading outward, deeper into the dim hall. Open Compute Projects, Open Rack v3, defines a common equipment frame. Its purpose is to provide structure and power interoperability for large-scale deployments. The standard turns it into shared ground before any chip can be impressive. It needs a frame that lets equipment fit, receive power, and belong in a repeatable row. A common frame sounds humble beside Blackwell chips and switch fabrics. Yet that structure decides where weight rests and how power can be presented to equipment. In a large deployment, sameness is not dull. It is the reason one row can repeat the next. The hall can grow without becoming a different kind of machine each time. The frame is a kind of agreement before the electronics arrive. It sets the repeated shape for equipment that may come from different designs. Uprights hold their spacing. Shelves wait in the same vertical order. A full row can be assembled from that shared outline. So the machine begins with geometry before it begins with silicon. You pass from the lit front to the structure behind it. The outer shape becomes simpler, almost architectural. Uprights and power spaces wait before the electronics arrive. The question that began as language now travels through rails, shelves, braces, and power bays. The Open Rack V3 power output connector specification defines a direct current range. It runs from 46.0 volts to 52.0 volts for that power interface. The number is narrow on purpose. It tells equipment what kind of electrical edge it will meet when it joins the frame. A power interface is a promise made in metal. The connector does not look dramatic. It is a place where electricity is shaped enough to be received. Here, voltage is not an abstraction. It enters through designed contact within a defined range, so modules can join the same large installation rather than a private invention. The power edge belongs to the unit as much as the processors do. It is lower and easier to miss. Yet, the defined interface gives it a way to receive equipment repeatedly. The same tall object can hold compute and power as related surfaces. The machine is large because its edges are disciplined. The bed has left the center of the picture. It is only the place from which the path began. You keep moving outward through the first machine, past the processors and switch. Storage shelves come next, then the frame and power that make the whole arrangement repeatable. The thought has become hardware, layer by layer. Its power edge sits below the glamour of the chips. It is closer to infrastructure than invention. Still, without that measured edge, the accelerator modules would remain separate objects. The frame gives them a place. The connector gives them an electrical meeting point. The network lets them speak. Storage gives the work something to return to. The first machine is now more than a face of blinking points. Processor trays sit in one depth. Switches gather another. Storage waits nearby. The frame gives shape, and the power interface gives a measured threshold. Your question has crossed each of these thresholds, becoming less like language and more like motion. No single part carries the whole idea alone. The accelerator claim needs the switch fabric. The close network needs a wider scale out path. That path needs storage near enough to feed the work. All of it rests on the frame and its power interface. In this hall, the cloud is only a name for arrangements like this, repeated far past any single one. The work settles into the hardware as a pattern of calculation. It is divided and moved. Then it is gathered through paths made before it arrived. Nothing here resembles a voice answering in the dark. It is a machine taking the long route through linked chips and shelves, then shaping an answer from many small, exact steps. The physical layers also slow the mind in a useful way. One object follows another. A tray, a switch shelf, a storage bay, a frame, a connector. The question passes through things that can be drawn and held. Its hidden speed does not make the room feel hurried. It makes the space feel arranged. You have followed far enough to feel the scale change. The bedside device was one object. The rack is one shape too, yet it contains a neighborhood of components. Farther inside, those elements behave as if distance has been shortened. Chips sit apart by inches, but their links make the room feel folded close around them. A liquid-cooled rack scale design also changes the look of computation. The important surfaces are no longer only fans and open air. Cooling paths sit beside chips. Cables share space with sealed lines. The machine learns in a built climate of metal contact and controlled flow. It is plumbed and powered. The hall stays unpeopled and quiet. There are no faces to follow and no hands on the equipment. The objects are enough. A switch face, a storage bay, a power connector, a frame. Each one keeps its place. Each one lets the work move farther from the little device that first received the question. Your body can stay at the start while attention moves through the machine. That is the easy split of the night. Warmth remains behind you. The path ahead is cool metal and measured links. The question leaves only the order of the systems it passes through. The rack scale system turns closeness into capacity. CPUs and GPUs occupy one design. The inner link fabric keeps the accelerators near one another in communication. InfiniBand gives the room its outward reach. Storage brings depth behind the compute layer. The shared standard gives the frame its shape. Because the facts are physical, they can feel restful. A number lives in a connector. A bandwidth belongs to a switch. A count of chips fits one enclosure. The mind can rest on each object in turn, touching only its outline, while the room keeps the harder arithmetic inside itself. The first rack has done its work. Chips sit close inside it. NVLink holds the inner exchange. InfiniBand opens the row. Storage waits nearby, and the frame and power edge make the arrangement repeatable. Past it, the row continues into the building. The aisle ahead is simple now. Repeated cabinets stand beyond the first one. Their details can blur without disappearing. The question is woven into the hall's measured order, carried by links and shelves that already know their work. You remain in the data hall, with the row continuing outward in front of you. You are a long way out tonight, and the aisle keeps going. Liquid-cooled machine learning servers can be nearly half the geometrical volume of air-cooled counterparts by Google's account. The reason is physical. Cold plates replace bulky heatsinks, so the same compute work begins in a thinner shape. On the work table, the metal part seems almost modest. A large change in the hall begins as a flat plate with sealed edges. It feels closer to a lid designed to carry heat away. You are carried down from the rack face into the lower level of the machine. The bright idea of calculation becomes a shape problem here. Empty volume matters because volume must be cooled and housed. Less tall metal above the chip leaves the row feeling closer. The aisle narrows around your attention, while the path continues beneath the cabinets. Nothing in it asks you to hurry. It only changes what the machine must fit. This flat plate is the replacement behind that figure. It stands where a bulky heatsink would have taken height. The heat path has left the tower of fins. It has become direct metal contact and a route for liquid. The server tray can become shallower, with the cooling surface tucked close to the processor. The change is almost architectural. Height becomes contact, and empty space becomes a managed channel. The bulky part has moved out of sight, and your attention moves lower. Google has deployed liquid cooling at gigawatt scale across more than 2,000 TPU pods by its own account. The fact takes the pipework out of the single cabinet. It gives the thermal system a fleet scale. A row can repeat, then another row can follow beyond it. In the distance, the same pipe logic repeats across many pods. The same account places coolant distribution units in the row. It also includes uninterruptible power support for high availability. Cooling and electrical continuity sit near the compute equipment. The distribution unit stands beside the rack as a working cabinet. Pipe connections gather near its side. The row, therefore, has a thermal neighbor and a power backup near the servers. You pass beside the distribution cabinet as if passing a second kind of rack. The processors have an adjacent body now. One cabinet holds the work. The next holds the route for heat to leave. Your own body stays far behind this scale, felt only as weight and warmth held in the background. The aisle gives no lesson. It gives objects in order, one after another. The cabinet's use is the way it lets heat leave. The deployment spans many TPU pods, so the unit of scale is larger than one tray. A pod becomes another repeated bay in a long technical space. The water path can appear again, then fade into the row. The fact remains concrete because each increase still begins with a cabinet, a pipe, and a sealed connection. Nothing has to announce the scale. Repetition is how the fact becomes visible. The row lowers the thought, one pipe and one cabinet at a time. ASHRAE Technical Committee 9.9 gives an air side reference before the water side. Its 2021 thermal card recommends 18 to 27 degrees Celsius dry bulb. For air-cooled classes, a 1 to a 4. The number makes the server room an allowed band. The range is designed, set apart from the weather outside. The aisle stays within guidance rather than mood. The recommendation differs from a bedside temperature. For equipment, it defines a technical envelope. You do not carry that scale yourself. The facility holds it as a permitted span rather than a personal measurement. Around the rack line, air has a defined range. The building keeps to it while your attention slides upward. Vents, pipe shadows, and ceiling panels become the next layer above the cooled hardware. You pass under that envelope as if under a roof made of numbers. Dry bulb describes the air measurement before the fluid circuit. The thermal range is stated for air-cooled equipment classes. That separates the room's air envelope from the liquid hardware below. Both paths are present in the same hall. The air is measured as a band, while the fluid line is built as metal and pipe. The distinction is useful because the next stretch follows water. The air has its band, and the water has its own path. The same thermal cards, high-density server class H1, uses a narrower recommended range. It gives 18 to 22 degrees Celsius dry bulb for that category. Dense servers receive a tighter airband in the guidance. The fact sits over the row without drama. It is just a narrower window for equipment in that high-density class. A shorter range makes the guidance feel less like weather and more like fit. You move through that narrower idea without stopping to solve it. The hall has become more exact, but not more demanding. Guidance belongs to the machines. Your attention only feels the narrowing as a cooler corridor. Cabinet fronts stand on one side, and closed pipework leads away on the other. There is enough to follow, and nothing to decide. The thought becomes narrow too, following the shape of the guidance. Class H1 is the high-density category in this guidance. Its narrower band gives the row less air room around dense equipment. The aisle answers with closer surfaces, a lower ceiling, and pipe shadows drawn in even lines. The fact lands as a conservative temperature target, held around machines that pack work tightly. Nothing flashes when the range tightens. The room simply becomes a more carefully held place. The tighter band passes over you. Then the root turns into water. Ashray's water-cooled server guidance describes the coolant distribution unit as an exchanger. It transfers heat from the technology cooling system to the facility water system. The name is technical, but the object is a boundary cabinet. One path receives server coolant, the other faces building water. Between them, heat crosses through designed metal instead of open air. It is the named hinge between the server cooling world and the facility water world. You pass that boundary as if the building has drawn a line through metal. The processor side and facility side stay close. They do not have to become the same thing. Heat crosses the exchanger, while your attention follows the crossing. The server row begins to give way to heavier pipes behind the cabinets. The room feels joined by edges now. The path has left the rack interior. It is becoming building infrastructure. The technology cooling system is the server side of that exchange. The facility water system is the building side. The distribution unit sits between them as the exchanger. A narrow technical loop gives heat to a larger facility loop. In metal, the separation appears as two pipe paths joining at one cabinet body. That junction is visible without needing numbers. It is where the machine stops being only electronic. The crossing is enough, and you are carried farther toward the wall now. Microsoft's Wisconsin Fairwater design would use closed-loop liquid cooling for more than 90% of the facility. The plan carries the fluid line beyond one room. Most of that planned facility would rely on contained liquid cooling. The pipework becomes a site-scale feature across the plan. The service corridor stretches with that idea. The design is described at facility scale. It changes the center of the thought from rack to building. Wisconsin is only a name passing through the hall here. You are still inside the building, following the loop as an idea made physical. A returning path changes the feeling of the water. It leaves the row and comes back within the same contained design. The route has memory because it turns back into itself, a held circuit instead of a line. That percentage is a facility scale statement in the Fairwater design. It makes the closed loop larger than a side feature in that plan. Most of the site is described around that contained cooling. It spreads from cabinet lines into broader mechanical corridors. There, pipes begin to look architectural, with long supports and regular bends. The pipework is now a way of reading the plan. The loop has become structure, and the structure keeps leading outward now. Microsoft's Zero Water Cooling design launched in August 2024. It is described as chip-level cooling that avoids evaporative water use for cooling. The phrase sounds broad, but the root is physical again. Heat begins near silicon. Then it moves into a closed liquid route instead of a process that depends on evaporation outside. That is the important narrowing. The cooling claim begins at the component. The surface meets cooling hardware before the route widens. You follow the route from the chip's surface into a sealed run. The air side grows less important in the thought. The liquid path has come closer to the source of heat. It has shifted away from atmosphere around the cabinet. Cooling begins as contact near the processor. Then pipework moves through a controlled corridor. Your attention travels with the leaving line. The contact point feels close, though the room remains industrial. Chip-level cooling makes the zero water design easy to picture. The work begins at the component, not in a broad evaporative process outside. That zero water framing is careful about purpose. It covers cooling, not every system on the property. In the tray, the idea becomes a close route from chip's surface to liquid path. A phrase that could sound abstract returns to a contact point and a fitting. The heat path has moved close enough to feel almost local now. By Microsoft's reckoning, the same design can avoid a large water need. The figure is more than 125 million liters each year per data center. The statement is limited to water can still be used for ordinary administrative purposes. Outside the rack row, that exact boundary settles into dry concrete and closed metal, with a contained circuit that does not evaporate for cooling. It is a large amount, yet it grows quiet once it sits outside the row. The water number passes without asking you to hold it. It becomes a space outside the row where metal roots stay closed and the ground remains bare. The building is still a machine, but it extends into an edge of low walls and service yards. Hidden systems gather there under low exterior surfaces. The route has widened enough to include the apron and wall line. Administrative uses sit outside the cooling claim in Microsoft's description. The zero water phrase belongs to cooling, not to every use on the property. That boundary keeps the fact exact. The contained cooling circuit can avoid evaporative water use, while other building purposes remain separate. In the yard, different lines disappear through unmarked walls. The point is exactness. The boundary belongs to cooling, and the property remains broader. The boundary holds, and the route keeps moving toward outside air now. At Mid-LOH the UN, Texas, Google's own gallery gives the next outside image. The cooling loop enters the lower side of the building there. Alongside it, a fiber trestle provides the data network into the same structure. Pipes and data arrive near one another at the outer skin. The machine room has become an exterior crossing. The roots are built into its side. It is one of the clearest moments in the structure's exterior body. You have reached the place where the room of racks meets its outside roots. The wall acts as a passage for two necessities. One root carries heat away through the loop. The other brings data into the structure, held above the ground on a trestle. You pass beneath that crossing. You are following a threshold rather than a corridor. At Mid-LOH the UN, the liquid loop and the fiber trestle share the same exterior threshold. The image keeps two systems physical. Cooling is a pipe entering low. Networking is a trestle crossing in. The compute floor receives both as built roots. At the exterior face, invisible services become shapes with weight and direction. The wall sorts them. Here, cooling and data arrive together like two different kinds of weather. The same gallery also shows backup power as a physical yard. Critical generators handle the critical load for the compute floor if a power interruption occurs. The fact sits outside the fluid path, near the same building shell. Large housings wait in rows under muted night light. The support system has weight and spacing around it. The yard gives backup power a visible body. You move from the pipe entry toward the generator yard, and the night stays even. The yard is another support layer for the rack room. Its large housings sit outside the wall. They make the building's edge feel wider, with reserves arranged beyond the cooling pipes. Your attention crosses from loop to yard without needing a story of strain. No person has to appear for the layer to make sense. That detail ties the yard to the compute floor's critical load. That demand is what the backups protect. If power is interrupted, the generators help carry it. The objects remain blunt and exterior. Long housings sit on pale gravel. Vent panels face the night without readable markings. Nothing in the yard needs a label to show its purpose. The support yard sits farther out than the racks, with the wall behind you. The rack room's heat has led you to the outer edge of the building. The details can settle without sorting. Metal roots and reserve power sit in their places. You move among them as shapes, while the larger campus remains beyond the wall. The machine is wider now, spread across thresholds rather than cabinets alone. The close rack world has opened into a perimeter. You are outside the server row now, yet still within the machine's shape. The building has grown into loops and yards. It has taken hidden heat from chip surfaces and led it through pipework toward exterior equipment. The night around it remains unhurried. Each piece waits at its own scale. The objects are farther apart now, so the mind can slow around them. At this distance, the data center reads as boundaries more than a glowing rack. Inside, cabinet rows continue. At the outer face, roots leave and enter. Outside, the equipment yard holds its place. You continue outward by following edges rather than lights. The structure becomes legible through its service side. Edges are easier to follow than mechanisms at this distance. The wall becomes the line your attention crosses next, slowly and without effort. Beyond the wall, the hall no longer has aisles to offer. It gives you pipe racks, concrete pads, and the wide spacing of equipment that belongs outdoors. The machine has not vanished. It has loosened its geometry. The rack's close interior has spread into a larger pattern across the building's service side. Space itself becomes part of the view. Your attention moves along the service side, past the pipe entry and the raised trestle. The named place has dissolved into location. Low roots, lifted roots, heavy housings, and a building shell receive them without display. Nothing here asks to be read. The facts have become directions a sleepy mind can follow. This is still the same machine, only less enclosed. The root is farther from the first rack now. The processors are hidden behind several boundaries. Their heat has become a path you can follow only by surfaces. cabinet sides lead to pipe runs. Those roots lead to wall openings. Those thresholds lead to yards under the wide night. The motion is outward, not back. The equipment is easier to forget when it spreads out like this. The night outside the building is open, with low equipment mass and a pale run of pipes. A trestle crosses without words. You are far from the room where the question first entered the rack. The movement continues outward because support systems have widened into the edge. That line becomes a low horizon for the next distance. You pass the outer equipment without making it into a destination. The generator yard and wall entries belong to the same sleeping infrastructure. The systems remain factual, but their edges blur in distance. What began as heat at a chip has become placement on the ground, outside the compute room. The concrete pad holds the last visible pieces of this cooling world. The cooled hall remains behind the wall now. Its fluid path has carried attention from plates to cabinets, then through service corridors and exterior routes. Pipes and fiber meet backup power under the open night without speaking. You are still moving farther from the bed in attention, carried by the building's shape rather than the shine of screens. That is far enough for this stretch. The wall rests behind you now, and the next distance opens beyond it. Microsoft Fairwater sites are purpose-built artificial intelligence data centers. Seen from the air, the buildings read as low roofs joined by roads and glass roots. Microsoft presents them beyond the scale of a normal office computing back room. They are designed for the larger shape of artificial intelligence, where one building begins to act with another. The roofs make the claim visible before any rack is seen. You leave the cooling yard from high above it. The pipes and roofs fall into a single plan. Then the plan opens to service roads. Your attention has become light enough to cross the campus without touching any door. The night air holds the layout in long, pale lines. The scale is larger than a hallway, yet it moves under you slowly. Fairwater is described for training new artificial intelligence models and running them after they exist. The same campus shape can hold both kinds of work. One kind teaches a system through long calculation. The other lets a trained model answer in use. The campus does not need to announce which work is happening. In the aerial view, both are simply roofs with hidden paths between them. The farther view slows the scale down. A roof is only a surface, then another roof answers it across a paved interval. You follow the line between them as if it were a river scene at night. The building edges stay exact, while the work inside stays unseen. No single doorway becomes the center. Microsoft separates these sites from ordinary enterprise server rooms. That distinction matters because the campus holds more than scattered business machines. It is described as purpose-made for artificial intelligence work at unusual scale. The difference shows up as length, repeatable blocks, and fiber corridors drawn between buildings like pale threads. The shape says repetition before it says speed. You pass the roofline, and the campus opens wider beneath you in silence. Inside Fairwater, the design uses NVIDIA GB200 NVL72 rack scale systems in Microsoft's account. The name is technical, but it softens into the idea of a larger machine. The racks belong to a connected campus description. They are pieces that can gather many Blackwell processors into one planned fabric. The line you follow slips from one roof to another. It does not look like a single cable now. It feels like a route planned before any one question arrived. Beneath the roofs, the same hidden order keeps choosing short paths inside long distances. The route asks less from you as it grows longer. The Fairwater design can scale to hundreds of thousands of NVIDIA Blackwell GPU chips. That is a described capability of the architecture, not a final count you need to hold. From this height, the number becomes a campus pattern. Long roofs hold repeated halls. The repetition implies more racks than the eye can sort. You can let the phrase stay outside the body, a large label for the far system. The scale can remain outside you, spread across the roofs and fields. Fairwater-style distributed networking is intended to support training models with hundreds of trillions of parameters. The phrase belongs to a design target, so it stays measured, a model that large cannot be held in one simple image. The network becomes the visible idea instead, with thin paths making distance usable. The size is too large for drama. It is easier as a planned link. You move with the paths, not with the arithmetic. A line crosses a service lane, then another bends toward a second hall. The thought of size passes under you like terrain. What remains near the surface is glass and conduit. Roofs wait beside the wide pause between structures. Each crossing is a piece of reach made calm by its own enclosure. The distributed networking target reaches across multiple sites. In Microsoft's framing, the training system can extend beyond one campus boundary. The roofs below are only one piece of a wider arrangement. Past them, the country gives the glass roots more distance to cross. A site can be a node without losing its weight as a place. The campus stops feeling like the edge of the system. It becomes a shore. Roads leave it in several directions. Fiber follows rights of way that disappear at this height. You travel with the buried part, over fields and sleeping industrial lots. The land between buildings is part of the ease. The farther you move, the less a building seems like the whole answer. A roof can be only a resting place for a larger pattern. That wider arrangement keeps its own scale, stretched from one data hall to the next. Your attention rides above it, loosened from the metal rooms already passed. What was once a room scale problem has widened into a geography scale pattern. A glass route can be vast without becoming loud in the sleeping land. Microsoft's Wisconsin Fairwater facility sits in Mount Pleasant, Wisconsin. The name gives the route a fixed place after so much abstraction. The site sits as a Midwestern point on a wider network. Around it, the night map can stay unlettered, with only roads and pale nodes visible. The name arrives once, then the place can become the Wisconsin node. The Mount Pleasant facility will use enough fiber to wrap the planet 4 times over, Microsoft adds. The number turns the campus into a coil wider than geography. It also keeps the fact simple enough to hold in the imagined yard, loops of glass wait in covered paths before disappearing under the roofs. The measured length is real, while the image can remain unnumbered. The named Wisconsin point gives the route a colder kind of nearness. It is a real place, yet it stays far from the body. You pass above it as a point of light, not a destination. The fiber measure has already passed. What remains is a sense of buried reach, carried out from the campus through sealed paths. After that measure, the country feels threaded rather than empty. You travel outward along a route too fine to see from the road. Fields pass below as muted shapes. Intersections come and fall behind. The campus has become one point in a system that keeps extending. Nothing in the view needs to turn bright. The long fiber thought settles into a simple shape. One strand leaves a building. Many strands gather beside it. The bundle turns away from the campus and vanishes into the ground. You keep moving with the vanished part, where distance becomes less visual and more like a held direction. The surface gives only covers and seams. Beyond the Wisconsin site, the route loosens from one company name. Another machine shape waits farther along the idea. It still needs roofs and glass paths. Your attention moves on, held by the simple line between sites. The same farther reach remains, because the path still depends on connection. Google Ironwood TPU gives the non-GPU path a current flagship. The route reaches a different processor family. Instead of Blackwell racks, the center of the picture becomes tensor hardware. The campus view stays broad. The logic inside changes into an arrangement built around Google's own chips. The name lands once, then the processor family can become the tensor stack. You pass from one kind of processor language into another. The outside remains low roofs, service lanes, and buried glass. Inside the thought, the shape changes. The graphics chip story yields to a tensor chip story. The outward motion stays the same. The change is technical, yet the view stays simple. A full Ironwood SuperPod uses 9,216 chips. That count belongs to the machine's maximum described shape. It is large, but it arrives as a single fact. The image can be calmer than the number. Cube modules sit in a field with cool gaps between them. The array gives the count somewhere to rest. The chip count fades into pattern as you move over it. Rows widen into fields. Those spread into a single block. The mind is allowed to keep only the arrangement, not every item inside it. From a higher view, the superpod is less a list than a piece of night geometry. The repeated blocks keep the scale from feeling sharp. That superpod can use an optical circuit switch and ICI fabric. The first name gives the light path a real mechanism. The second keeps the chip neighborhood joined inside the stack. Together, they make the route through the machine more like arranged glass than loose wiring. The switch is a place where routing can be chosen by light. The switch sits as a clear crossing. It is not a hallway or a rack face now. It is the place where a path of light can be selected. You move over the layout as if the machine were a field of possible lines. Only one line needs to be followed at a time. Light becomes the way across the array. A path can change without the whole picture becoming frantic. You follow a pale line through one cube group, then across the switch plane. The rest of the layout stays still around it, as if the route has room to breathe. The line is enough to carry the thought. With those fabrics, ironwood can operate as a single, massive parallel processor. The phrase means the stack is meant to work together, beyond a pile of separate islands. Many chips remain many physical chips. The fabric gives them a shared working shape, spread across the cube field. The unity is functional, not visual magic. One field of chips becomes one pale shape, small in the far distance. Ironwood's optical circuit switch network can bypass an unhealthy cube. The change stays technical, not dramatic. Light simply avoids one section of the array and keeps a complete circuit elsewhere. In the cool diagram, one dim module is left aside, while neighboring lines continue around it. The omitted piece leaves the response in the surrounding glass. You follow the bend around the unlit cube. The route remains only a change in path. The array stays wide around the missing piece. Your attention moves with the line that has already found another way. The bypass is only geometry, seen from a restful height. The same optical network can swap in a spare cube. That reserve module waits inside the arrangement. It is another unit the route can include. The larger shape of the superpod remains legible from above. The replacement enters within the designed array. The new optical path establishes complete circuits without physical rewiring. The machine can change its route in light before the picture changes in metal. Cables remain seated. Cube groups keep their positions. The movement is in the optical choice, traced as a pale line through the switch layer. The hardware keeps its posture while the route changes. The room beyond the diagram stays untouched in the mind. The path changes without opening a latch or disturbing a cable. The change is enough. You continue outward with that idea, past one cube field and toward a pattern too large for a single roof. The larger fabric waits beyond it. Google's 2026 Artificial Intelligence Infrastructure announcement names Virgo Network with TPU-8T. By that announcement, the fabric can connect 134,000 tensor processors in one data center. The statement is pointed toward the future in the way an announcement is. The one-site fabric becomes a wide floor of possible connection under one roof system. A single site becomes too wide to feel like a room. You pass over it as a surface of points. Each point is only a place in the fabric now. The number can fall behind. It gives way to the feeling of one roof stretched around many connections. The roof becomes a boundary around connection, not an object to inspect. By the same announcement, the network can connect more than 1 million tensor processors across multiple data center sites. The scale leaves the single roof and becomes a set of distant roofs. It is still a planned reach, not a fleet already running. The phrase carries distance without asking the listener to measure it. You travel past the first site until it becomes only one pale square. Another marker appears far off, then another. The arcs between them are roots of glass distance. They are drawn lightly enough for the land underneath to remain spacious. The map has no labels, only relationship. That reach across sites is described as one training cluster. The phrase means more than one building. It is a working arrangement that can span sites while the training problem remains shared. In the overlay, separate campus lights settle into one loop of connection. The work is imagined as shared across the linked places. That final scale is an announced capability, not a live fleet count. It is something declared possible by the design, not a census of machines already running tonight. In the planning view, a few dots and arcs can carry the broad fabric. Past the announcement, the route grows simple again. Sites pass in sequence, all held by paths the eye cannot fully follow. You are carried above the country rather than through a corridor. The first cabinet is distant, a detail inside a much wider machine. The land below is no longer background. It is the space the fabric crosses. Those buildings stand as markers, not destinations. Each one has its own roads and yards. From this height, the spacing matters more than the buildings themselves. The machine has learned to use separation as one element of its shape, because connection has been designed across the gap. Spacing joins the machine's calm geometry. You are farther from the first cabinet than any aisle could show. The route has crossed roofs, yards, maps, and named sites. It is still glass, switching, processors, and planned connection. The scale changes, the objects stay concrete. The line under you is almost too fine for the country it crosses. A campus is heavy with roofs. A fiber root is light in the mind. Held together, the training system can be local and spread out. It belongs to places and to the paths between places. Neither side has to cancel the other. Below, the linked sites can stay unpeopled. The forms alone make the system legible. Roofs hold the building scale, cube fields the chip layer, and arcs the reach between sites. Your attention can rest on that geometry as details grow less sharp. The layout can hold the work without turning into characters. The farther fabric no longer feels like a single machine in a room. It becomes a geography of machines. Roofs carry one part of it, and cube fields another, while glass paths run between places. The naming has passed, and the picture loosens into distance. The fabric has become a map that does not need words. Your attention rides beyond the campus boundary again. The sites remain behind as pale clusters. The connecting arcs thin until they are almost only direction. A training cluster, once named, becomes a night pattern spread across a country without needing every part held in focus. The land below is only faint texture. The wide system can simply stay wide. A roof gives way to another roof. A campus opens toward another site. The glass root carries the idea farther than one building can contain. You continue outward, beyond the roof fields, into the broader country around them. The linked places hold their distance without becoming separate stories. From up here, the machines lose their edges first. Roofs flatten into pale marks. Fiber becomes direction rather than an object. The processor cubes are far below the surface of the thought. What stays visible is the relationship between places, held in cool lines that can fade without breaking. The system keeps its scale, even as attention loosens around it. Farther ahead, the linked sites thin into the space between towns. The fiber paths are behind you and beneath you. The country opens with fewer points of light. You are still out in the system, moving beyond the buildings, while the wider night makes room for the next distance. It does not turn back yet. You rise above the last cross-site fiber paths, and the campuses loosen into scattered light. The city thins underneath you. Beyond it, power lines cross fields and water, black against the northern sky. The question has already become work in distant machines. The energy beneath that work begins to show its own root. From this height, the glow below is not a bedside glow. It is the spread of buildings and line corridors. A data center power train turns utility power into conditioned rack power before the load reaches the equipment. The route passes through switchgear and uninterruptible power supply batteries. Backup power sits farther along the same chain. By the time it enters the computing floor, electricity has been received and shaped, with reserve behind it. The route feels like a long translation from the public edge into a prepared interior. Switchgear is the first visible threshold after the outside supply. It appears as metal sections arranged before the battery rooms. The place feels still from above. Yet, every cabinet face belongs to a path that was built before any processor asked for power. The panels make the outside world feel sectioned and slowed. Power feels like a room you can pass through. The battery system sits deeper in that chain. Its purpose is not drama. It gives the load a held reserve, while the power train keeps the computing floor supplied. Beyond that layer, backup power belongs to the same briefed path. The equipment waits in a low room of enclosed cells and graphite shadows. The idea is simple enough to hold. A stored reserve can stand inside the power route. Beyond the battery room, the route is still power, but it turns into architecture. Metal doors, raised thresholds, and enclosed cabinets make the supply feel slow and deliberate. You move through prepared spaces. The load is treated as a thing received before it is used. The rooms keep the energy legible, enclosure after enclosure. You float past the lit edge, farther out than the machine hall. Rack power distribution units are the last link in that power chain. The floor power distribution unit feeds a rack unit, which distributes electricity to equipment inside the enclosure. The long route has narrowed to sockets and rails, close enough to the machines that the handoff feels like the shore. That last unit makes the final handoff ordinary in shape. It receives power as distributed outlets instead of one vague force. These can look plain beside processors, but the final distribution happens there. The black rail along the side panel turns the wider grid into usable contact. That vast feed has reached equipment scale, though it still belongs to the grid beyond the room. You pass along the cabinet row without settling back inside it. Power is closer than fiber, yet farther out than the first room in feeling. It comes from outside the walls. Devices reduce the size of the world step by step. At last, a rack can take it quietly. The path has no more grand scenery at this point. It becomes the last measured reach into equipment. The chain of electricity has become narrow enough to disappear behind the cabinet. No new glow needs to announce it. A cable bend, a socket bank, and a closed side panel are enough. The work keeps running on a supply that has crossed from the grid into the room's measured interior. The electrical rooms fall behind in layers. First the broad incoming edge, then the held reserve, then the rack's last contact. Their order can loosen. It is enough to feel the path narrowing as the lights below spread farther apart. Google's Carbon Intelligent Computing platform can shift many compute tasks toward hours when low carbon sources are more plentiful. The work is still computation, but its timing can move. On a dim planning screen with no numbers, bands of work slide toward paler places in the night. The platform does not change the question the computer is answering. It changes when many pieces of work are invited forward. This kind of shifting makes time one layer of the infrastructure. Many tasks can wait for a better hour. Others remain where they are. The modest detail is timing itself. A machine room can also have a calendar without making the night feel busy. The room keeps its machines, but the schedule around them has widened. The change is placement more than spectacle. On the abstract timeline, work becomes a band instead of a burst. It can slide without becoming theatrical. The facility still needs power and machines, but some computation can meet the hour instead of forcing the hour to meet it. The thought is almost sleepy in its usefulness. You are carried with the later work, farther than the switch room below. Google also uses data center demand response software that can temporarily reduce power demand when called by an outside utility or grid operator. The claim is simple and external. A signal from beyond the facility can become a lower draw inside it. The change lasts for a while. The facility remains an arranged load inside a larger system. The request for reduction comes from outside the data center boundary. A temporary reduction has a calm shape here. It is a managed change in demand, not a scene of loss. The software belongs between the facility and the wider grid. In the cold panel light, the site becomes less like an island and more like a load that can answer. Your attention follows that answer outward. The building no longer seems like the edge of the system. Beyond its fence, the grid has its own slow weather of supply and demand. The computing work can bend a little with it, while your body remains far behind the thinking. The path of attention can keep moving without needing to manage it. Microsoft's Project Forge uses checkpointing so artificial intelligence training or inference work can be paused and restarted. That helps schedule workloads when hardware has available capacity. The fact belongs to time as much as power. Work can be given a clean pause, then opened again in a room of waiting machines. A saved point lets the work stop without losing its place in the sequence. A checkpoint gives the task a place to resume. It is a mark inside the work, not a visible seam in the building. The hardware can be used when capacity is available, and the job can return from its saved state. In the mind, that looks like a dim shelf where a pattern rests. You move beside that paused shape as if beside a parked train. It has not vanished. It is simply waiting in a form the machines can recover. The grid outside is wider than the room, and the work inside can learn to share time with it. Power and computation cross each other within one slow thought. A rack needs contact. A campus needs a supply. A workload may also need the right hour. The outward path has left the bright equipment behind and entered the larger timing of places. The machines are still physical, but the main picture has widened into scheduling and supply. N-Scale and A.H. Kerr announced Stargate Norway with OpenAI. The plan targets 100,000 NVIDIA graphics processors by the end of 2026. The site remains an announced project. Its planned capacity is 230 megawatts. It also leaves room for more expansion over time. Far north, the name gathers into a valley rather than another anonymous data hall. The project is large, but it is still only planned. These are still targets, not a finished room you must hold in detail. The scale is enough. A landscape-sized electrical promise becomes a future arrangement of buildings and supply. The northern site remains quiet in the planning tents. It stays far away, softened by terrain and night. You rise over darker water and sparse roads, carried beyond the city pattern. The lights are fewer now. They sit apart in the terrain like beads on a long thread. The machines behind you have grown into a distant appetite for power, and ahead the land begins to answer with valleys. This is no longer the close view of a port or a plug. It is the kind of distance where infrastructure becomes geography. The Stargate Norway facility is planned for KVAH Chendal, outside Narvik. The announcement cites abundant hydropower, a cool climate, and industrial infrastructure as reasons the site is suited to large-scale data operations. The fact gives the planned project a real edge of land, under mountains, and a low northern sky. KVAH Chendal keeps the plan from becoming missed. KVAH Chendal gives the announcement a local shape. The place is not a floating claim. It sits outside Narvik, where industrial ground and water power can be spoken together. A road bends below a slope, and the data site reads as shadowed geometry among larger forms. You pass above the valley lights, held far from the first room. The Narvik site is planned to run entirely on renewable hydropower. N-Scale also describes closed-loop liquid cooling there. The plan includes recycling waste heat for local low-carbon industries. The power source and leftover heat point outward from that planned facility into a colder industrial landscape. The briefed plan links electricity and heat use before the site has become a familiar room. Closed-loop liquid cooling keeps the idea of water inside a circuit. Waste heat has a destination beyond the server room because the plan names local low-carbon industries as recipients. The fact is practical and muted. A building can be designed so its heat is not merely an ending. That can be held as a sealed water path with heat leaving toward other roofs. The hydropower valley gives the plan a slower backdrop than the machine room could. The slope holds water and industry in a single wide frame. The facility outline belongs there only as a future shape. After the technical names, the land can take over again. Your attention rests over the hydropower valley, where the planned facility remains a shape in darkness. The earlier racks have thinned into memory. What remains is simpler: supply and timing, water beside a place where future computation is meant to sit beside existing industry. Beyond the lights, electricity becomes visible as spacing. A substation yard and a line corridor hold parts of the same idea. None of them needs a label. The path of power is drawn by the objects that must stand apart. The spaces between them matter as much as the equipment. In the switching yard, pale insulators and metal frames sit under the sky. The arrangement can hold the eye. Power has come out from behind the server cabinet. It opens into a landscape of clearances and cables lifted into the air. Only arrangement remains. You rise a little farther from the ground lights. The valley floor drops away into a broad hush. Behind you, cabinets and pale schedules have each done their part. Ahead, there is only the long coordination between a planned load and the resources around it. The higher view makes even the software feel like terrain. From above, a workload schedule has no sharp edge. It is a pale arrangement beside a shadowed supply line. The mind can follow the spacing, then release the exact mechanism as the valley opens. At this height, the building and its timing are no longer separate pictures. Metal appears in the lower layer. Hours arrange themselves above it. Together, they make the facility feel wider than its walls. From here, even the scheduling layer feels like terrain. Across the valley, the machinery is less visible than its spacing. A yard holds one kind of pause. Lines cross above it. The planned load sits in that spread as a future weight, surrounded by air and water. You are far enough out that the machines feel almost geological. Racks and schedulers recede into layers. The land takes more of the frame. The artificial lights are small now, and the overhead lines seem to stitch one cold valley to another without asking for attention. At this scale, brightness has become a trace rather than a destination. Narvik remains tied to planned capacity and hydropower in a northern site. Large numbers can stay factual and distant. A planned campus near KVA Chendal is just another point where energy and computation meet. The valley keeps the scale broad, so the project does not have to sharpen. The valley already has enough real objects to hold it. A substation fence, a river channel, a building pad, a line tower on a ridge. The mind can move from shape to shape, with the scale left wide around them. The route behind you has softened into intervals, prepared room, a cabinet edge, a schedule without labels, a valley with power lines crossing above it. The line is continuous enough for the mind, even when no single cable stays visible. You continue beyond the planned site, following the idea of supply rather than one cable. The route is no longer bright enough to trace continuously. It appears in intervals, a fenced yard, a pole line, a distant industrial roof, then the black surface of water beyond it. In this far place, time has turned into a surface. Work and supply no longer feel stacked in order. They spread outward together. The facts are separate, yet they settle into one slow motion through the power system. What mattered as mechanism has settled into a broad rhythm. The outward motion keeps it light enough to pass. The northern climate stays in the background as a texture, not a promise beyond the brief. Air lies close to the ground. The valley holds its metalwork without display. Hydropower and planned computing sit in one long view, spaced by roads and water. The wide grid is too large to hold at once. It arrives in pieces that keep their distance from each other. A yard on gravel, a corridor under lines, a low roof near water, a dim ridge beyond it. Your attention can pass across those pieces without collecting them into a hard map. You feel the distance as a widening, not a departure. The first device is far behind in attention. The power route has led through cabinets and switchgear, then into schedules and valleys. The farther you go, the less any single machine needs to be held sharply. Only the outline of each system remains. A rack power strip is near enough to touch in thought. The regional grid spreads beyond reach. Between them, scale changes many times. It becomes enclosure and corridor, skyline and future load. No one piece holds it by itself. The thought can cross those forms without naming every boundary. The farthest objects are almost still. A line tower holds its angle. A transformer bay keeps its spacing. A roofline waits below the ridge. Nothing here resembles the quick answer that began the work. It is all preparation and timing stretched into terrain. You pass over the last visible yard and into a wider northern darkness. The work behind you has not disappeared. It feels less personal, less bright, more distributed. Somewhere back along the route, cabinets still receive their final power. Out here, only the supply lines remain readable as shape. The wider view is sparse enough for the systems to stop feeling technical. The planned site near Narvik sits behind you as a marker in the valley. The details loosen into place. What remains below is a simpler pattern of water and faint light spread under the northern sky. The route continues beyond it. The grid runs on without becoming a story to finish. You are carried over it in the same slow outward motion. Beneath you, Power and time have widened past the data hall, and the northern night holds the rest in reserve. The next distance is wider still. The homeward turn begins at the wide grid, where the lights below have thinned into a low pattern. You are still far from the room, carried over continents rather than corridors. The machines no longer appear as racks or pipes. They have become demand, measured across a world that keeps glowing without showing its figures. The International Energy Agency estimated global electricity use by data centers at about 415 terawatt hours during 2024. That was about 1.5% of the world's electrical consumption. At planetary scale, the number leaves racks and buildings behind. It spreads as a faint wash laid over coasts, inland corridors, and sleeping seas. A measure that wide is too large for a bedside thought, so it becomes area, not arithmetic. The continents remain still beneath the measuring layer. Scattered points gather near coasts and valleys, while your attention follows that surface back inward, down from the highest view. The world scale number has no edge you can touch. It lies across the night like weather that does not move. A blue field here, a cluster there, a wider glow over industrial land. You pass above it without keeping the total. The turn home already begins to simplify it. The agency's updated projection for 2026 starts at 485 terawatt hours in 2025. The line then rises across the decade. By 2030, the endpoint is 950 terawatt hours. In that same view, centers focused on artificial intelligence grow faster than the wider sector. The curve rises without drama, a pale arc over the sleeping map. The arc can remain far away while your body stays simple. Cloth carries warmth. You cannot see the room again yet. Still, the turn has begun. Attention follows the measured line down from the wide grid, passing through distance without needing to keep the whole curve. Projection becomes a shape at this hour. It leans forward, then becomes a line you can leave behind. The higher end of the arc belongs out there, in reports and distant rooms, not in the sheets. You move past it, as if passing a ridge in the night. The same agency says electricity demand from data centers optimized for artificial intelligence is projected to more than quadruple by 2030. The statement is large, yet it lands as a single marker. A brighter band lifts from the general field, then rests inside the same low night layer. The scale asks for no solution. It only carries the measure back inward. The United States Department of Energy looked at the same question. Its report put data centers at about 4.4% of the country's total electricity in 2023. The estimate narrows the lens from the planet to a country. Below, the land shape is darker, with pale city clusters still too far away to name. A country scale figure has a different weight from a global estimate. It feels nearer to the light behind the wall, though it remains outside the house. You pass over it as a surface of measurement, not as a problem to hold awake. The path is coming down through scale. At this height, a national total becomes a sheet of tone. It does not show machinery close up. It only shows how large the far system looked from above. The sheet tilts, and the route keeps sinking toward the familiar. The department summarized a Lawrence Berkeley National Laboratory report on electricity use by United States data centers. It estimated a range for 2028 of 325 to 580 terawatt hours. The interval appears as a shaded band, not a sharp point. It gives the future a width, then lets the map stay still beneath it. The range stays out on the measuring glass. It does not enter the pillow or the breath. Your attention keeps coming back through the layer of figures, slower now. Each large estimate becomes less like a claim to memorize and more like a patch of distance, changing shade. A range is a calmer object than a single hard mark. It admits a width and then leaves space around it. The eye can cross it without stopping at an edge. Behind it, the national lights continue to sit in their own pattern, unlabeled and far below. The broad estimates are behind you now. A world layer gives way to a country layer. A future band hangs within it, pale and unfinished. Those layers remain behind like weather on a map. They were useful for a while, then the view turns toward simpler gauges. The green grids work, established power usage effectiveness, as the industry preferred metric for measuring data center infrastructure energy efficiency. The measure belongs to the building around the machines. It gathers energy into a comparison rather than a tour. In the mind, the idea becomes a ring around a quieter center. A ratio can be easier to carry than a long list. It folds a facility into comparison without asking attention to chase every cable. The gauge stays abstract. A center and a surrounding band share the same circle, and both remain far from the bed. The name sounds formal, but its work is reducing. Instead of following the many rooms in a facility, the measure lets infrastructure become proportion. The distant building loses its doors and aisles. It turns into a relation held in a circle of cool light. Google reported a 2024 fleet-wide average annual power usage effectiveness of 1.09 across its global data center fleet. The value is close to the middle of the gauge, where the surrounding band is drawn thin. The mark is exact, but the picture stays spare. You pass the gauge without keeping the decimal. The shape is enough. A narrow outer band, a filled center, and a far room where efficiency becomes proportion. The exact mark has landed once. It can become a thin edge and fall behind you. The homeward path turns turns from energy toward water. The map does not become busier. It only gains another clear shape beside the ring. Your attention moves from one resource to the next. It feels like crossing from a lit coast to a still inland lake under the same night. The green grid introduced water usage effectiveness to address water use across data center design and location, and also in operation. The measure brings another resource into view. The energy gauge gives way to a clear reservoir shape with no scale marks and no label. The surface is separate and easy to hold. The water shape stays separate from the energy shape. That separation does most of the work. Those broad terms settle as a clear surface beside the energy ring, leaving room for place without naming a site. The language gives water its own measure, separate from the energy ratio. The surface can stay almost motionless in thought. No pipe or outlet has to be followed now. The homeward turn has entered its simplest forms. Cooling a data center is a balance between using energy and using water in Google's own framing. These buildings generate heat, so they must be cooled. The balance settles into a pair of gauges beside each other, one brightening as the other falls back, both far from alarm. At this distance, even heat becomes a line on a cool dial. The paired gauges make the last measurement feel slow. No steam, no machinery close up, no worker seen. Just a resource balance held in simple shapes. You pass it as you passed the earlier bands. The harder details remain in distant systems, while the room ahead becomes more possible. The measures have turned the system into simple shapes. World demand, national use, building energy, water, cooling. The words are broad, and the formal names have begun to fade. You move through them as through mist over a high night map, with the homeward line bending lower. Uptime Institute's tier standard for topology compares data center site infrastructure through 4 classifications. Those classes are based on redundant capacity components and distribution paths. The language becomes a faint branching map, with spare routes shown as pale lines beside the main route. It has no labels to read. A topology diagram is less like a machine close-up. It is a way of seeing whether a site has another path. The lines do not need labels. They separate and rejoin, showing that infrastructure can be compared by prepared routes. In the return, even resilience becomes a drawing. The classification language stays high above the hardware. It does not open a cabinet or enter a yard. It only compares prepared capacity and the paths that can distribute it. For a tired mind, that becomes a relief map with doubled channels, raised lightly above a surface. You are turning through the last of the measurements. The distant world has become ranges and ratios. It is easier to carry than the machinery. Nothing has to flash. The return can keep lowering itself, leaving the classes behind as pale branches in the upper air. The large measures have passed, and the map can dim into the darker room. The first estimates were planetary, and the last standard was about site shape. Between them, the system has lost its close detail. It no longer needs the visible rack face. It can be held as unmarked forms, floating above a dim hemisphere, while the route home continues underneath. A far grid is still outside the window of the mind, yet the route home feels easier than the outward path. You are carried by reductions. A terawatt hour has become a wash of light. A cooling choice has become paired arcs. A site standard has become branching lines. The measurements are lighter than the equipment they describe. They do not carry metal weight, coolant paths, or campus distance. They hold proportion. So the homeward motion can begin here, among abstract bands, after the distant buildings have become simple enough to recede. The global map loosens first. Borders vanish because they were never the point here. Only the night pattern remains, a veil of distant demand beneath the measurements. It hangs for a while, then begins to contract toward a nearer glow. The planet becomes less exact as the room comes close. What remains can be left as scale, light enough to fall behind. The names have had their turn as markers. Those signs recede. The distant machinery dims into proportion. That relation is useful out there. It does not need to come inside. On the cold display, no figure needs to be read. The marks have turned into spacing. A wider band, a thinner band, a paired curve, a branching path. The mind can follow that arrangement without holding the exact values, and the panel can slide away into distance. The return passes through a layer where measurement becomes texture. Energy is a broad glow. Water is a darker surface. Resilience is a line that has another way around. None of it asks for a decision. It simply settles into shape, then begins to fall behind the lowering point of attention. Below the abstract layer, the land is no longer a project site or a grid diagram. It is only the sleeping surface of Earth. The distant data centers have disappeared into their measures. Their details are allowed to blur, because the last facts have already landed and the motion has slowed. You are nearer, though the room has not returned. The turn inward passes over a coastline without a name. It follows neither fiber nor power cable anymore. It traces distance shortening, while the body remains where it has been all night, under its cover and apart from the measurements. The map changes scale without announcing it. A hemisphere becomes a weatherless region. That field becomes a loose scatter of lights. Each narrowing removes a little detail from the distant system. By the end, only a path of low brightness remains, bending toward a place too familiar to label. Measurement has made the far machines easier to leave. The measured words loosen first, and the physical rooms loosen after them. A rack is heavy in the mind. A ratio is lighter. By now, the distant machinery can be carried as a thin layer, nearly transparent, over the night. The thin layer folds toward a neighborhood of unmarked roofs. Campus names have disappeared. City labels are absent. The scale feels domestic again, though bed and pillow wait beyond the next turns. The roofs hold only a rainless shine and little window points. You pass over the last wide road as a pale thread. The house is not visible yet. There is only the suggestion of roofs. Then, a window carries amber light behind the glass. The far map is now behind you, reduced to a shallow sheen. The distant system remains out beyond that window, but it has lost its sharpness. Energy and water stay back in the measured layer. Sight form stays there too. The room ahead begins to hold the question again, without carrying the machinery inside. The return is almost domestic, but it stays unhurried. Through the glass, outside light is only depth around you. No gauge comes through the pane. No standard diagram sits on the wall. The house receives the returning attention in surfaces instead: a floor edge, a muted wall, a closed curtain, a glow with no numbers. The device beside the bed remains a little shape in the distance. Its glow has no readable time. It did not contain the answer by itself. It opened a path through things too large for the room, and now that path has thinned back to a domestic point. The exterior night falls away from the window. The house becomes the place that has been waiting under the arc of attention. The far estimates remain true without being held. They can stay outside, where wide systems belong, while the room gathers its own scale around you. Inside, the room returns as warmth, rather than another explanation to carry. The night map has shrunk to a reflection on glass beside you. It needs no borders or gauges now. A patch of amber rests on the pane, and the world outside has become only depth. The far machines are somewhere beyond it, reduced to scale and left there. The bedside device waits without a clock face. It gives off a numeral-free glow, a pearl under glass. The question that began here has returned changed. It is no longer only a question. It is a path that touched large systems and came back simple. Your body is still where it began, with the cover holding its mild heat. Attention has gone out and returned, bringing almost nothing back that must be named. The device can stay unlabeled. The room can keep the rest, with no need for the far measurements to enter. The wall is wall again. The glass is glass. A line of amber along the blanket can carry the whole return. What was wide and numerical has narrowed into texture, close enough to stay unnamed. The last remnant of measurement appears as a pale ratio fading from the wall. It carries no readable value. It is a memory of the ratio, not the ratio itself. Then the wall is only wall again, and the far map stays outside it. The room has taken back its surfaces around you. What remains near the bed is the original simplicity. A question was asked. Far away, machines received it through systems too large to see from here. The answer can arrive without bringing that structure into the room. The device is only a dim point again. The answer belongs to the little glow. The maps and gauges have finished their passage. The diagrams can remain outside the wall, where distance has made them light. Inside the room, the question no longer asks you for the whole system around it. It only needs the point that received it. The glass of water catches the domestic glow. Its surface carries neither number nor map. The standards layer is gone from the room. Only a tiny wavering line remains, and even that settles against the still surface. Nothing farther away has to be solved from here. The larger path stays outside. It stays with unmarked maps and fading diagrams, already loosened from attention. Beside you, the screenless glow has become a point. The room is warm enough to hold it. The distant data centers have become distance again, and distance can rest beyond the glass. The room holds almost no explanation. Cloth and glass are enough, with the wall holding a little glow. The wide measurements have thinned into background night. Your attention no longer has to travel outward. It can settle where the amber light gathers at the edge of the bed. You are a long way out tonight, and still home in bed.